Well, lady and gentlemen, moving on to our guest speaker tonight, Annie Flodin, all the way from Boeing in Seattle, Washington State, not Washington, DC. And Annie is from the historical or Boeing Historical Services, and she's going to talk about Boeing, and she's here in Australia, just gathering historical information about Boeing in Australia. And she's been a very busy lady. I believe she's here for a couple of months to have a look and see what we've got. And Annie, good to have you on board here.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you so much. I have to say that being here is very humbling to me, and I'm really honored to be amongst you all because I'm here primarily to learn from you. And it's really a treat to be able to share a little bit about what I do at Boeing in our Historical Services Department and tell you a little bit about, excuse me, about what I'm doing here in Australia. So, and you can hear me okay? Is this fine? All right, so just to start, I'll give you all a little tiny bit of information on my story and what led me to Boeing and what I'm doing today. So I'd say first and foremost, I consider myself to be three things: a storyteller, an av geek, which aviation enthusiast, whatever title you want to put with it, and a historian. So I went to school at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, where I am from originally. That's where I grew up. I studied journalism there because I always, ever since I was a little kid, loved to tell stories. I come from a very aviation obsessed family. So my parents actually met as flight attendants on Eastern Airlines back in the US in the 1980s. And my dad was in the US Air Force. He was a navigator. He started on the B-52. He flew the C-141 and retired on the C-130. So aviation's always been a part of my life. I spent a lot of time growing up on Air Force bases, but it really didn't pique my interest when I was a little kid. It wasn't until I was a young adult that I really started to become fascinated with flight myself and interested in the mechanics of flight and really the story of aviation. So at that time, that was probably 2015, I'd say, I started a blog called The Great Plains. That's my little special logo there in the middle with the 747, which is one of my favorites, so much so that I have one tattooed on my left arm. And I've been writing there. I just wrote my 100th blog a few months ago. It's just sort of an outlet for me to write about what inspires me relating to aviation. And after a couple of years of doing that, I really wanted to figure out how to make that or something similar to that my full-time job. I didn't know what that looked like, but I knew I loved telling stories. I knew I loved learning, and I knew I loved airplanes. And I started applying for jobs at airlines and at Boeing. I didn't apply for jobs at Airbus because I didn't think they'd sponsor me to go over there anyways, but I really loved the Boeing story. So I came to Boeing in our corporate communications department in 2017. And I started in Chicago, which was where we were headquartered at the time. We were actually headquartered there from 2001 until very recently. They moved the corporate headquarters to Washington, DC. So we're not in Seattle anymore, which is a bit of a bummer for a lot of the people who grew up in Boeing families. But these are just a few photos showing me kind of in my element. So my personal life and my work life are, the border there is very blurry. I essentially go to work every day in the Boeing archives, which I'll tell you more about in a couple minutes, and usually find myself out at one of the Seattle area airports in the evening, taking photos, standing on top of my car, just like that. It's just, it's something about airplanes. I'm just fascinated. If I could, I'd spend all day, every day out watching airplanes fly, specifically ones that aren't so common anymore, are my favorite thing to see. And planes like the 727, my parents met flying as flight attendants on 727. So that's really special to me. The other ones, there they are. Let's see, the one in the top middle is really special to me. That was the first time I visited our Everett factory, seeing a 747 being built up close. That's a set of the landing gear for the big plane. Bottom middle, that's myself, and standing next to me is a very important person. That's our senior corporate historian, Michael Lombardi. He has been with Boeing for 43 years. He's still with us. He is just a wealth of knowledge. It's like you wish you could just take his brain out and implant it into some of us younger people, because he knows so much. But he's been a mentor to me and a really great friend and just an inspiration. And when I met him, I immediately thought, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. I want to be Mike. So I was fortunate to eventually join his team. And then in the top left, that's a very interesting one. That's a gentleman named Bob Parks. There's a aviation book some of you may be familiar with, Ernest Gann's Flying Circus. So Ernie Gann, very famous pilot, storyteller. Bob Parks did all of the artwork in that book, and he started at Boeing in the 1950s as an engineering illustrator. He still lives north of Seattle. He actually was on the phone with Ernest Gann when the DB Cooper hijacking happened. So he tells really great stories about how crazy that night was, and they were both listening to their radios and the air traffic control feeds. And but he's just a wonderful person. We go up and visit him as often as we can and go through some of his artwork with him because he's just so talented. But moving on to the team that I'm on. So Boeing Historical Services, our team was actually founded in 1945. And I think that's the case with a lot of sort of archives, history groups, because the engineers in World War II designed so much and had so many records, and they thought, like, we have to keep this stuff. Someone is going to want this stuff someday. So our team was formed back then. We primarily, you can see these bullet points here. Our mission is to preserve and promote the history of Boeing. We're really unique especially in the US aviation world, that our history goes back so far to 1916. That's when the company was founded. And over the course of the last 106 years, Boeing has acquired so many companies. It's hard to even keep track of them. We actually consider 8 companies to be our sort of core companies. So they're Boeing, McDonnell, Douglas, North American Aviation, Jeppesen, Stearman, Hughes, and Piasecki. And those are just the big ones. We have so many other little companies starting back in the 1920s that we've acquired. So it's our responsibility to preserve the history of all of them. So it's a lot. And the other thing I like to mention is that some people might think that our team and the archives is really just sort of a basement, a warehouse with a bunch of stuff in it, and we keep it because it's the right thing to do. But our archives and the collections within the smaller collections within our big collection really prove valuable to Boeing today. Some examples of the teams that we work with within the company can be seen there. So sales and marketing will come to us quite often when they're working on a campaign to sell airplanes to a certain customer. They'll ask us, when did we first start working with Icelandair? Can you show us some pictures of the first delivery? And they'll put that into the marketing materials to Icelandair when they're trying to sell them a new 737, things like that. Communications, that's sort of my bread and butter, telling stories. These days, our communicators are very interested in weaving in Boeing's history whenever they can, just because it's so unique. Legal, so if Boeing's ever involved in a lawsuit, our legal team comes to us right off the bat to do some research for them, to provide whatever documentation they need to help Boeing in that case. And then engineering, that one's really about helping our engineers today from having to reinvent the wheel. So if they're working on a new airplane, a new design, a new part, they'll come to us to see if we've done anything remotely similar in the past to look through that documentation, which can save them a lot of time and money in the end. So we do a lot of unique research and support a lot of external teams and individuals as well. A lot of authors come into the archives to do research for their books. Journalists, especially with events like the 747, we just delivered the last one in January. So that was all over the media. We had a lot of journalists approaching us during that time. Museums and restoration groups. We have in the US, at least we're headquartered in the US, the Commemorative Air Force, which is a bunch of chapters scattered around the country and some internationally as well. And they preserve and fly more than 100 World War II airplanes. So when they're working on a repair or they acquired a new airplane and they're working to restore it, they'll usually come to us to help them with things like manuals, drawings, anything they can to work on that project. So our archives, and I'll show you some more pictures in a minute. This gives you an idea of what we hold. So we have about 30 million artifacts. Our new facility is about 20,000 square feet. I know I speak not in the metric system, so that's I should have done the conversion before, but it's quite overwhelming. You can see here sort of how it breaks down. Most of our collection are what we'd call our manuscripts. So literally just papers. It's correspondence from CEOs dating back to Bill Boeing in the 1910s, all the way up through our CEOs today. We have thousands of scale models, everything Boeing built, everything Boeing didn't build. It's an overwhelming amount. You can kind of get an idea of what some of the shelves look like there. We have the world's largest collection of aviation photography. I think it's about 10 million photographs that we keep in a very large cold room. We have everything from negatives to slides, prints, motion picture film, the list goes on. There's a lot of unique stuff there. So we actually just moved the collection for the first time in 22 years, I think, from Bellevue, Washington, which is about 20 minutes east of Seattle, to Auburn, Washington, which is about 30 minutes south of Seattle. It took about 6 months. It was a very long process. We had to hire a contracting company to do most of it for us, just because it was not practical with we only have 4 full-time team members in Seattle. But it was a huge task. This shows our new facility being constructed. We're adjacent to a fabrication facility down in Auburn. So it's a bit different environment for us. We were originally just kind of in an office business park in Bellevue. There we go. So this gives you an idea. The top left is kind of what you would see if you first stepped into the archives. I feel like this picture doesn't do it justice because when you walk in, you really can't see the end. Like if there's someone standing at the end, they're just a speck. It's 100 rows of movable shelving, floor to ceiling, that are probably like a little wider than this room. And it's amazing. This gives you a look down one of the 100 aisles. And then this wall of models really spans that entire wall that you really can't, it's just unfathomable to think that there's that much history in one space, but it's very special. It's a privilege to work there. Here's a few more pictures. So these are movable shelves. It can get a little intimidating and frustrating if we need to get to something in, say, row 88, and it's currently open to row 4. It takes a while and a bit of strength because it's literally hand cranking all of it. On the bottom right in the middle, you can see we have a lot of original artwork, and that's something that's very special to us. All sizes from a variety of different, very famous aviation artists. And this kind of just puts into perspective those big 8 companies that I talked about before, and also shows you that really until now, Boeing and the story that we tell. So like one of my main jobs at the company is to go around to different sites and give presentations on the Boeing story and to improve employee morale, to onboard new employees, because a lot of people come to the company and have no idea that we're 100+ years old. They have no idea what we did in World War II. Just there's a big opportunity to teach the next generation. So this gives you an idea of what the mergers and acquisitions over the last 100 years, but you'll notice that it's only focused on the US. And so what happened is, and we clearly have this great presence in Australia through the acquisitions that we've made over the past 30 some years. But in 2021, when the Royal Australian Air Force celebrated its centenary, our Australian colleagues here, communicators, came to our team looking for help as they partnered with the Air Force on plans to commemorate that huge milestone. And we realized that we didn't really have anything. We went back into the archives, and Mike, our senior historian, knew that we had this great history here, but we've just not had the budget or the time or the resources with a very small team to do this story the justice that needs to be done. So we essentially had to tell our teammates, we don't really have anything. We did the best we could researching secondary sources to tell the stories of the different people and products that were built here by Commonwealth, government aircraft factories. And really, we did the best we could with what we had, but it wasn't very satisfying. And we all knew that something had to be done about that, because Boeing considers its sort of founding in Australia to be 1927 with de Havilland Australia, because we ultimately acquired that company. So this is a super high level little chart showing sort of what makes up Boeing Australia today. There could be many more arms on this, I think. And in fact, some might not be, oh, thank you. Some might not be perfectly organized there, but that was the best I could do with what I knew at the time, when I realized about this time last year that we needed to start better understanding our history out here, the history of Commonwealth, the history of government aircraft factories, Hawker de Havilland, ASTA, all those companies that fold up to Boeing today, especially if we're thinking we want to do some sort of a big celebration in 2027. We need to completely understand everything that's happened here and start telling those stories. And for me personally, I really want to weave in the Australian history into the everyday Boeing story that we go out and tell, because it's so US centric. And even our teammates here, a lot of them have no idea what happened in the factories that they're working in at Fisherman's Bend. Like, they don't know that. And I feel like it's kind of our team's responsibility to change that. So I was very motivated to do something about it, and to better understand the history with that anniversary coming up. So and here you can see, this just gives you an idea when we were faced with the challenge of not having anything in the archives. This is really what we were relying on. We were relying on Keith Megg's books that we had a copy of in the archives, and one article that our senior historian did in 2012. That was essentially the extent of what we had at our fingertips, and we knew we wanted to change that. So this gives you an idea. This is like a screenshot of a web page that our Australia team built in advance of the centenary, and some of the products that we wrote about and that we researched, and all the ones boxed there in red are the ones that we built here in Australia. And we just looked at that and we're like, oh my gosh, this is so big. And there's no other country or site that has history like Australia when it comes to Boeing's story. I mean, it's almost as old as Boeing itself, which is just mind-boggling that we've gone a century without talking about it. Granted, we only merged with and acquired the Australian companies in the last 3 decades. Even that is just disappointing, in my opinion, that we haven't done a better job to capture that right off the bat. So when I started thinking about pitching a project to kind of fix this, I was really starting from scratch. I knew a couple colleagues here at Boeing in Australia, and that was about it. I really resorted to Google and just went crazy there, just typing in everything I could think of: historical societies in Australia, aviation museums in Australia. Eventually reached out to probably 25 or 30 different groups, mostly, as would be expected, most of them were located here in the Melbourne area, just since that's where most of our early history happened. But it's been a long process. Over the last year, I've been in constant contact with groups like this, with museums like Moorabbin. I spent 2 weeks down there. I'll be up at HARS for a week, visiting different historical societies. I was at the Royal Historical Society of Victoria this morning, where I'll spend some good time at the National Archives. I'll be at the Public Record Office of Victoria tomorrow. Just a lot of little nuggets are spread all throughout the country, which is a unique challenge for us because at Boeing, everything's in one room. So my goal with being here is to understand what's out there and to make it accessible to Boeing teammates. So to let our teams here start to use these collections, or at least point them in the right direction in the ways that engineers and legal teams and communicators use the collections in Seattle today. And then also, selfishly, it's for the storytelling. I really, really want to stop thinking of Boeing and Boeing Australia and just think of Boeing. And if we're gonna acquire these companies, I feel like it's our duty and we owe it to everyone who worked at those companies to ensure that the stories and all the things that happened there over 50, 60, 70 years is captured and told to the next generation, especially realizing what an opportunity there is to tell those stories to our teams here. I feel like in the US, the general story of Boeing is pretty well understood by most employees. And I feel like the Boeing Australia story needs to be very well understood by our Boeing Australia teammates. And we talk about and sort of promote the fact that we're such a global company, but we're not really talking about it in a historical sense. And I think that really needs to change. So that's sort of my goal. I'm just kind of in a gathering phase right now. I've been visiting, I built up a schedule based on where these different collections were. I have a month here in Melbourne. I'm going up to Canberra. I'm going to spend some time at the Australian War Memorial. I'm meeting with, and I think he was supposed to speak tonight. I'm meeting with Martin James, the Air Force historian, up at the National Archives in Canberra, visiting Temora, and then off to Brisbane and Sydney. Brisbane, not so much the history stuff while I'm there, just kind of visiting some of the Boeing sites, saying hello to some colleagues, but I'm very excited for HARS. I've heard really great things. And what's been really interesting to me is just seeing and I feel like this is kind of how it is in the US. I should have expected it'd be similar. Everyone knows everyone. Like someone at the National Archives will say, "Oh, do you know Maureen up at HARS?" And then Maureen will say, "Oh, well, I know Mick Sorensen down at Boeing Aerostructures." And I'm telling her I just had a meeting with him yesterday. It's like everyone knows everyone. We're all passionate about saving this history. And that's why I'm so grateful so just like looking back a year ago is when I first learned about this group, and I watched the presentation that Dennis Baker gave on saving those archives. And to think that now I'm like one of the squares in that meeting is really, really cool to me. And it's just really, it's an honor to be here and to be able to do something like this and to share the passion and enthusiasm with others who feel the same. So I think that's probably the last slide. That's really all I have. Like I said, I'm kind of just making the rounds right now, seeing what I can see. I found some amazing stuff when I was at Moorabbin, like one that really stood out to me was a handwritten letter by Lawrence Wackett from 1935 outlining why he should start an airplane company. So that's like gold for our team. Like I immediately, it was probably late at night, but sent a text message to everyone on my team and was like, you won't believe some of the stuff that's here. Some beautiful photographs and personal collections of John Story, who I understand was the director of the Beaufort division at Department of Aircraft Production. I found some of that stuff at the National Archives. Our Boeing site has some amazing stuff that Mal, who's here tonight, and the Gaff Heritage Group have been preserving and documenting. It's just remarkable to think that so much of this has been saved and well preserved thanks to volunteers. That's just amazing to me because I feel like I'm one of the few people who's paid to do this. Like I'm working and making money at Boeing, but everything out here was done by volunteers. And it's just like how grateful we are for people like that. And so I feel like now it's our time to help and come out here and do what we can to get all that work out there and known to the world. So I'm grateful to be here and appreciate the chance to talk with you all. And I'm, yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'm glad to do my best to answer them.
Can I just check, is this microphone working? A thumbs up on the line if this is working. Okay, terrific. What we'll do is we'll go around and do some Q&A in the room and then we'll come to the online questions.
Good evening, Annie. I enjoyed your talk immensely. David Anders is my name. I worked at CAC from 1966 till 1989. Yeah, 89. And while I worked there, and to this day, I have a very keen interest in the history of CAC. I'm going to ask you a question, and I hope that the answer will come out right.
Okay.
At the end of all of this,
Yeah.
gathering of information and putting it out there to the world, we are never, I hope, going to hear of a Boeing Wirraway.
Oh my gosh, no. And I 100% and literally just was telling, I think the Gaff Heritage Group that the other day. No. So one of my something that really makes me cringe is the Boeing 717. So when McDonnell Douglas had the MD-95 and Boeing rebranded it right after they acquired them. No, absolutely not. That's one thing that when ideas started churning in my head about how we can commemorate what we would consider the Boeing centenary here in Australia. And I immediately started thinking like, we need to plaster up logos of CAC and Gaff everywhere and ensure 100% that those names are constantly thrown out there and associated with the products that they built. Because I mean, you can't. And I'm 100% on the same team as you, that those aren't Boeing products. We were fortunate to be able to acquire these companies and tell their stories, but they're no, it'll never be the Boeing Wirraway, I
I'll hold
promise.
you to that.
Yes, please do.
One question from Mark Pilkington, just one.
Annie, Mark Pilkington, I'm a CAC enthusiast. I've
Yeah.
been involved with Moorabbin and I negotiated with your company for both the Gaff archive collection and the CAC collection to be brought to Moorabbin and involved with others trying to set up the archive there. But my question to you is, you're focusing on 2027 and the centenary of de Havilland Australia's birth here in Melbourne. So it was a Melbourne company originally. And I'm just wondering what your plans are for that anniversary. What do you envisage Boeing internationally and Boeing locally planning to do for that centenary?
I have to say that right now I don't have a solid answer. We're just starting to talk about it as part of this trip that I'm on now. I do know that especially at our Fisherman's Bend site, but also throughout all of Australia, there will likely be some very prominent displays set up around the factory and some events for sure to celebrate, because we did a huge event in 2016 for Boeing Centennial, and we have to come out that strong with this. Oh, yes. No, and absolutely, you're honestly reading my mind. So I also thought about that and how lucky we are that, so I only knew up until the other day that March 2027 would be the actual centenary month. I just found out when I was doing some research at the National Archives that it's March 7th was the official date that they were incorporated. So that's great. It sounds like if Avalon keeps the same time frame, that's so lucky to be able to work something out there. And I was actually down at Point Cook, I think it was earlier this week. I'm losing track of time these days. Earlier this week, the museum still closed, which I was so bummed to have to miss that this time around, but I was able to see some of their aircraft and go back and see some of their collection of archives. And we started floating the idea about like some sort of a flying display and stuff like that. And everyone seems really on board and interested to support. And I know I pitched to the Moorabbin guys, like, maybe we could take a few of the coolest artifacts on loan and really just get them out, show them to the world. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But I know that our team and the Boeing Australia team are going to start seriously planning that very soon, because 4 years will fly by. Yeah.
Richard Honus. Annie, we've heard about Boeing Australia, but is there other countries like Australia that Boeing have a number of factories in? And could you tell us what other countries they might be?
I will be completely honest with you that the only other, so up until recently, Australia was our largest site outside the US. India recently overtook that, but it's only by employee number. I think still based on what's done here, it can be considered the biggest in terms of like footprint and what we're doing and building. Aside from Australia, though, I think the only one that would come close and that perhaps we would try to do something similar in the future would be Canada, which is obviously very close to Seattle. So it kind of feels like it doesn't count as much, but it's like the same. And yeah, I mean, so I'd say Canada. We have history there dating back to for instance, we had the first international airmail flight from Vancouver to Seattle. Bill Boeing and his pilot Eddie Hubbard actually did that together in a C-series airplane that we built. I think it was 1919, but I'm not 100% sure. But then we had factories up in Canada, I think as early as the 30s. So that'd probably be the next one. And honestly, the only one that I'm really aware of. Everything else has been fairly recent, I think, comparatively speaking. So yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. Hi, Annie. My name's
Hi.
Graham Carter. I'm a visitor here, but I was interested in your whole story, but particularly the records that the photographic type records that you now have found a home for in your place in Seattle.
Yeah.
Have they been catalogued and have they been digitized?
Oh, I'm so glad that you asked this, because that was actually something I really meant to talk about. So cataloged, yes. And I will say that we're kind of behind the times in how we've cataloged stuff. So currently our collection is really organized via a massive Excel spreadsheet. And so you think 30 million artifacts. So I think we have like 50 copies of it or something, just to be safe. But we're in the process of 2 big projects right now following our move, which was our focus for a while. The first one is we are currently, and it's jointly funded by our engineering department and our communications department. Our team's technically part of communications. We're digitizing half of the collection over the course of 5 years. So that's a big undertaking. We again had to hire, we're fortunate to have budget to be able to hire people to come in and do that. But it also shows that our senior leaders are interested enough and see the value enough to do that. So we are working on it. A lot of our photography is already digital. We have a system we call the CDAM. It's the Creative Digital Asset Management System, I think. And so a lot of it's accessible to us, but it's only within Boeing. So anyone within Boeing can essentially access the huge portion of photographs we have already digitized. But the goal in the end, so the digitization, and we're also working on implementing a new collection management system. And the end goal with that will be everything has barcodes and stuff like that. Like when I was visiting the National Archives the other day, I went down into their repository and it's so well organized. They take a scanner, they scan a box that tells you everything that's in it. And so we're working to get to a point like that. And once we do start to get further along in the digitizing project, as well as the collection management, the goal would be to make whatever we can make public. So that's probably, I don't even have a time frame. But yeah, we really are at the point where we want to make things accessible, and it's not worth it for them to just be sitting on shelves in the dark. So yeah.
Another question
Yeah.
for Richard.
Richard Honus, what is the reason for the head office of Boeing moving from Seattle to Washington, DC?
I don't know.
They didn't like Chicago.
I do. So our defense organization, so we're kind of divided into 4 main departments: corporate, BCA, which is Boeing Commercial Airplanes, BDS, which is Boeing Defense, Space and Security, I think, and Boeing Global Services, BGS. Our defense stuff is headquartered in DC, and it has been for quite a while, even though we don't do as much in the production world on the East Coast. We do, that's where we build our V-22. Our V-22 helicopter program is out there. But you know, especially after COVID, so the Chicago move, so Chicago is in the middle. So we were headquartered in Chicago for about 20 years. That was the result of the merger with McDonnell Douglas. So they were in St. Louis, and we, I think, and this is how I interpret it, it was the best sort of middle place, given we had facilities really on all coasts, and McDonnell Douglas was in St. Louis. We'll move the headquarters closer to that sort of little center of the country. But with the move to DC, I think it was more so around getting out of Chicago, although I'm not really sure why back to Seattle wasn't a good viable option. I don't really know enough about it, but yeah, the main goal there, I think, was to get out of Chicago. We had a very small presence there, a lot of high-level executives, and with COVID, almost everyone who had been based in Chicago was now working remotely. So it just felt very strange for us to have our headquarters there. But I wish I could tell you more on the move to DC. I'm not really sure though.
Another question from you.
Annie, another one.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you took over McDonnell Douglas, did all their historical records go to Boeing? Yes. Good.
Yes.
Okay. So the follow-up question is this: CAC records, GAF records now belong to Boeing. Is it going to be physically removed to America, or will it stay here?
Oh, that's another really good one. So when we first started talking about doing this project, the first thing, before I knew I needed to know the answer to this before I started contacting museums and archives out here, I chatted with Mike, our historian, said, there's no like expectation that we would ever take any of this stuff and bring it to Seattle. And he said, absolutely not. No, this stuff needs to stay in Australia. And so, I mean, we don't have any intent of moving anything. We're not really in a position to do so. I'd say the one collection that is unique is the one located at Fisherman's Bend, just because it's on a Boeing site. So that's sort of the one that we have a little more wiggle room with in terms of how it's kept, how it's organized, what might ever happen to it. But aside from that, we had no interest in moving it because I feel like that just wouldn't really help anyone to get it out of where it belongs. But yeah, we're not really in a position to do much, if anything, with those ones located off of Boeing property.
Okay, we're going to go to the online questions now. So Annie, we've got David Fredericks. Fredo, go ahead.
Hello, Annie. Nice to meet you virtually, finally.
Hello.
Looking forward to catching up with you in a few weeks' time up here in
Me too.
beautiful Queensland, okay?
Yes, I'm so excited.
Couple of things I just want to mention. Firstly, you made the point about 2027, and I know there was discussion about Avalon. One thing to be aware of, we in the Air Force run a thematic each year, and this year we're doing 70 years since the end of our RAF operations in the Korean War. But 2027, we've chosen the thematic, which is innovation in the Air Force.
Oh my
And that
God.
includes the stories of Lawrence Wackett and all that. So there may be some synergies in there for both of us to talk in future about that.
I'm so
Okay.
excited. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Wow.
So yeah, when you're up, we can have a chat to that, and I'll introduce you to my boss, and we can see if we can smooth the waters for something that space. Okay.
Oh, that's so exciting. Thanks.
But the other thing I was going to mention is when you go up to see Martin James in the National Archives, please make sure you take the time to go and get him to show you the Wackett collection that's held there.
Okay.
And
I
I'll
will.
just bring up some photos there if you can see behind me. These are some of the pages from his collection, and it's a volume about so thick. So there's photos like that of him. There's Wackett in front of the first Mustang and the like.
Oh
So there's a wealth of information there. And finally, I think you've made me feel happy because we've got 6.5 million photos down at Point Cook. We're also struggling with a CMS, but at least we're better than having a spreadsheet. So we've got one up on Boeing. So thank you.
That's very exciting. We have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. So Annie, just on behalf of my team in Air Force, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to seeing you up in Queensland very soon.
I'm so excited. Thanks, Fredo.
Okay, thanks, Fredo. Peter Dunn, over to you.
G'day, Annie. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Many thanks for a great presentation. Coco, my cat, says to say hello.
Oh my gosh, that's so sweet.
My question actually has already been asked. I was going to ask about are any of your historical photos or documents digitized and will they be made available online? So I won't dwell on that, but I thought I'd just get online and say hello. You showed them your 747 tattoo, but
Yeah.
have you showed them your Boeing tattoo yet?
Oh, no, I haven't. It's
Well,
easy.
you better do it.
Told myself I've loved that logo for as long as I can remember, and I told myself if I ever get to work on the history team, I'm gonna get it in ink, and I did.
Okay, thanks a lot for a
You're
great
wel- thank you
presentation.
so
See you
much.
later.
Thanks, Peter.
I know. I was like, this is so dangerous. My parents will kill me. I feel like they're not huge fans of tattoos as it is, but they could get on board with these, but I don't know if I can add another one.
Okay, so we've got a question from Roderick Smith. Roderick has kindly changed his background to have a couple of Boeings on there. Go ahead, Roderick.
That's the 7.2 is one of my absolute favorites because that's what my parents were flying when they met.
Yes, I heard that comment earlier, and I was rather pleased that that was the one I'd chosen tonight. But not so much a question, but a comment. That was a fascinating presentation on two counts. It's aviation thrust, and the fact that I did a unit on archiving as part of a postgrad, and just the whole scope and passion in the archiving and what you're achieving. And one of our guest speakers then was putting up a computer version indexing the the National Library based in Washington. It was your United States Library, and the total magnitude of the task and finding a computer way of achieving it. Well, you're going to do it.
Yes. Thank you
That
very much.
predated digitizing the material itself. The only thing they could run on computers then was the actual indexing, not the items. Now you're doing both. Great
We're
to hear.
very, very excited about it. It's been a long time coming. Hopefully everything goes according to plan, but we're excited to share the story as it happens.
Hey, Fred over here, I put a 747 SP tail up for you. There you
Oh my
go.
gosh, it's a competition. Okay, I do love the 747 and especially the SP, so that's really amazing.
Okay, Warwick Henry has a question. Warwick, you'll need to unmute.
Thank you. One thing I was going to give you congratulations when you raised up Hawker de Havilland the first time. I thought, oh, good, she's written a small DE, and that's gives you good points. And then the last time I saw you, you had Hawker de Havilland again, and you got a big Hawker de Havilland. De Havilland always is a small D. And just want to mention, yes, Boeing products. I've flown as a first officer 1,600 on Boeing 727-200s, and over 11,000 on captain on 737-300s, 400s, and 800. So, my thanks.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, I should have mentioned also one of the places I'm really looking forward to visiting is the Qantas archives. I forgot to mention that. My passion is really in commercial aviation, but the military stuff came very quickly to me when I joined our team, and it was a big learning curve, but I'm getting there. But to visit Qantas will be really exciting.
Are there any more questions online? You can raise your hand or just stick your hand in the air where I can see it. Fredo again.
And when you're up in Amberley, I don't know if you've teed up to go and meet the Boeing people on the base as well. Are you interested in doing that?
I am set up to do that actually. So I'll be with you on Tuesday. I'm going up to the Oki facility on Wednesday morning. Well, actually we're heading there Tuesday night, and I'm coming back to Amberley Wednesday afternoon.
Okay. So after you've been to Army, you can come back and see the best. Okay, that's good.
Oh, no.
Okay.
I'm
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I may fly Boeing as well, you know, Fredo. Any other questions?
Yeah, but they're broken mostly, so it's okay.
Oh.
No, well, I think we might wrap it up there unless there's any other questions online. I don't see any. So I'm going to thank everyone. Do you want to give a word of thanks to Annie and remind her that she's going to
stay here? Okay.
Well, ladies and gentlemen and Zoom persons, good to have you here tonight, and I hope that you have both enjoyed and been educated by our guest speaker, Annie Flodin here, and learning a little bit about Boeing and its archiving, and it does us all good, I think, to hear that Boeing is actively preserving its history and the companies that it's put under its fold over the years as well.
Thank you so much.
And I hope that on a side that you have enjoyed your tour here in Australia. And I understand from talking with you earlier that you hadn't been to Australia and didn't quite know what to expect. Was it going to be kangaroos hopping around the airport or whatever?
I had no idea. I know that's correct. I will say besides airplanes and animals are my two greatest loves. So I did go down actually the day of that other air show. What was it? Benalla?
Benalla was last
weekend. So that same day, Saturday, I was told by multiple people to go to that air show, but I already had reservations at the Moonlit Animal Sanctuary and had such a great time, although it was very hot and windy. But seeing some of the, I really made a full day of it with wombats and koalas and kangaroos and emus. It was just
and one thing that you didn't bother about, of course, was going on a tram, because you've got a couple of trams from Melbourne running along the seafront there, backwards and forwards, and they're older models compared to the current models.
Yeah, so I will say in general, I've loved the public transportation here. It's much better than Seattle's, which has been such a treat. Riding trains, trams, you name it. But I did see, and I've actually been noticing so I'm staying right near Flinders Street Station, and one of the trams that runs there looks very old. It's like 30, it says 35, I think, on it. And I really wanted to like hop on board that one. I don't know if it only runs.
It's a heritage circle.
Okay, it's so cool.
Mm.
And I notice it every time, and I think I've taken like 50 photos of it. And
Goes round in a loop.
okay.
It brings you back to the same spot.
Okay, so that sounds perfect, actually. Maybe I'll try to hop on tomorrow if I know I'll end up in the same spot. I was thinking about just getting on it, but that sounded risky.
Annie, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you
And
so much.
a copy of our latest
Oh, wonderful.
Aviation Historical
Thank you.
Society journal for you.
Thank you so much.
And I'm sure that Dave Knight will organise your postal address to put you on the list as
Please,
a
yes.
an honorary member for the next year. So you'll continue to
Wonderful.
receive that journal. I hope you enjoy and
Thank you.
maybe pick up a few tips and clues and
I will.
speak Australian if you like.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Have a good round of applause.